Brian's a passionate advocate for a new kind of Christianity, just, generous, and working with people of all faiths for the common good. So you can see a great and a natural featured speaker here in World Unity Week. Brian's book that he has out at the moment is a book called Faith After Doubt, and we're going to be exploring some of these themes. And Brian just shared a new book that he's working on, which will be released in August next year in 2022, which is a book called Do I Stay Christian? Wonderful themes for us to be exploring, Brian McLaren, and we're really, really grateful to have you with us. Thank you for your time. Now, we met, Brian, several years ago, 2015, at the Parliament of World's Religion through our common friend, Patrick Carolan. And I remember we went down to the reggae bar where Pato Banton was playing the gig. And you were sitting down and Pato was warming up. And I think you had to catch an early plane the next day, or you needed to leave at a certain time. So I went up to Pato and I said, can we start the gig a little bit early so that Brian McLaren, he's a big deal. He's got all these books and he's an important voice in emerging Christianity. Can we start it early just so he can hear your music? Pato said, in a generous spirit, he said, okay, sure, he did. So he started playing the set early. No one's on the dance floor. And then he said, look, he stopped the music and he said, I've started playing for someone who's got to leave early. So whoever you are, you better get your butt up here on the dance floor and start dancing. And that was it. So you got up and we all got up. And I remember some of our friends there were students there at the time at the theological school, Harvard Theological School, and it was a highlight of their parliament, seeing Brian McLaren dancing on the dance floor. So,
well, that was a great fun night. I'll never forget it. Oh my goodness, it was great.
Now, Brian, one of the reasons I'm so excited about sitting down and talking with you is I think you are one of the most important voices in the progressive update of Christian theology, intellectually and spiritually on the planet right now. And it's a very important theme, not just for me personally, but I think for our world. Yes, it's the world's largest religion, and yes, it's got its, Christianity has got its tentacles, if you like, into every aspect of human life on the planet. So, what happens in Christianity matters a great deal to the world. And that goes for the good things and the not so good things, and all the way through to the terrible things. So as we look at Christianity, like the evolutionary process of religion, always reinventing and emerging and always becoming, I see you as a critical agent in that becoming. And that you come out of evangelical Christianity in America, which is such a huge force that influences politics and environmental understanding and so much. I just see you as doing incredibly critical and important work. So we're delighted to have you with us, Brian. And I want to ask you, what role in this world we're talking about in World Unity Week, where we have Indigenous voices and social activists and environmental activists and many different spiritual perspectives coming together, what is the role of Christianity in an emerging world that is united and harmonious and sensible relations with other cultures and diverse and cosmopolitan, and a world that we can all be proud of co-creating together?
Yes. Well, I think the most honest thing I can say to that, Ben, is I think we will see Christianity playing on both sides. In other words, I think we'll see elements of the Christian faith be leaders in that kind of common good collaboration. And I think we will definitely see Christians be leaders in a hostile and supremacist, conflicted and irresponsible dimension of behavior in the world stage. I think it's a both and, partly because it's such a big religion. But I think the same happens in almost any group that gets big enough. You end up over time with a kind of drift. I think about a motorboat, how it has a wake behind it, and the farther away from the boat, the wider the wake. And I think what happens in religions is that their founders may have had a beautiful vision, but over time, people can drift very far from the vision. They still use the person's name. They might still occasionally quote selections from his teachings, but it's very possible to actually be working on the opposite side of a religion's founder. And that's certainly the case in the Christian faith. And it's not just a recent development. I think There's a really interesting story in the Gospels where Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And Peter gets the right answer. And Jesus says, "Way to go, Peter. You didn't figure this out on your own. God's revealed this to you." And then Peter makes a really stupid statement. And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan. You're playing on the wrong side." And I think that just shows the nature of religion. We can have something beautiful one moment. In the words of Joni Mitchell in one of her songs, we can be an angel, we can be a devil, we can fly, and we can crawl too. And I think we certainly see that in the Christian faith.
Well, that is very much an honest answer, Brian. I appreciate your honesty and evaluation of that and the reality of that. I guess the question is, what can we do to try to encourage it on one side rather than the other side? And that's something. What do you think is a responsible way for those who identify, even those who maybe not fully inside the Christian church and yet feel connected to it regardless of not identifying with an institution? What can be done to try and kind of carry it across that threshold? Because that can have huge ramifications for everything.
Well, you said something a few minutes ago that I think really bears repeating, and it's this. 31 to 33% of the world's population identifies as Christian. About 21 to 24% identify as Muslim. You put those together, we have half the world's population. I believe it's an old Buddhist saying that when the elephants fight in the forest, the grass suffers the most. In other words, when you have two titans battling it out, they can handle one another's blows, but all the poor and the vulnerable and the little people are damaged by these titanic controversies and clashes. And I just wrote this book, Faith After Doubt, and at the end of the book, I was recounting my experience with doubt, and I had this sort of insight wash over me that in many ways, all the doubts that I had were getting at one central doubt, and here's what it was. I had been taught that to be a Christian means you need to believe in the supremacy of the Christian religion. And I realized that what I was really all along sort of hitting up against is I didn't think it was a good idea for any religion to have supremacy. And this to me is a challenge. How does the Christian community, this would apply to other communities too, but how does the Christian community maintain identity without supremacy? Who are we? What do we stand for? What are we here to do? And the articulation of a non-supremacist identity is one of our great challenges. And the good news is this is happening. I think it might have been what was certainly, 50 or 70 years ago when a great African-American Christian theologian named Howard Thurman said these words: "By some amazing but vastly creative spiritual insight, the slave undertook the redemption of a religion that the master had profaned in his midst." And that to me is the challenge that's going on in the Christian religion. The Christian religion has been profaned. It's been profaned by white supremacy, European supremacy, colonialism, male domination, carelessness toward the environment, theories of war that justify whatever war they want to go into. And that profanity, here's, as you said, because the Christian religion is so big, you can't just throw it away. It's still out there. And so more and more of us have to endeavor to redeem what has been profaned. Does that make sense?
It makes incredible sense, and such an inspiring quote from Howard Thurman. And he's got a few, of course, but that's a beautiful one. But it strikes me, Brian, that all of it comes down to a misabuse of power.
Yes.
And a misunderstanding of the relationship of power that Jesus had and what he taught as to serve, not to dominate. But even the will to convert others is a form of oppression and domination, and not the deep listening and the deep humility and that servant's heart that doesn't go out there to dominate, but comes to elevate. And I think you're really hitting it on in the heart there, understanding. But that will to dominate it's not just a Christian thing. It's a political thing. It's a cultural thing. It's all around us, isn't it? In
It's a
humanity,
human thing. Yeah,
it's a human
thing. That's right. And when you think about it, you realize that we have, I guess anthropologists tell us about 200,000 years of evolution of Homo sapiens, and then, several million years of primate ancestors of Homo sapiens. We've got a lot of evolutionary juice, and practice put into our need to form bands whom we can trust to protect us from other bands of humans who want to compete with us, or who might steal our children, or who might eat all the protein in our hunting area and leave our babies hungry. And so, this deeply embedded competitive spirit is certainly part of our evolution, but so is our collaborative spirit. And this to me is one of our great challenges. What, in a sense, you think we start with just my ego, my self-preservation, and then I extend my concern maybe to my nuclear family, then to an extended family, then to maybe a larger community, maybe to a religion or race or nation. But our great challenge now is that we have to make two moves for our survival in a relatively short amount of time. We have to extend that concern, not just to a religion, race, nation, political ideology, and so on. We have to extend it to the entire human species and extend it to the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
And this is a new step in our development, and it's fraught. And we would be fools to think that it won't be opposed, because there are a whole lot of people who are making a whole lot of money and getting a whole lot of power out of the way things are.
Yeah, conflict is good business. There's no question about that. It's interesting, Brian. So I've heard before, or thought before about adding a commandment to the two great commandments. So it's love God, love your neighbor, and love the earth is almost like another one that needs to be included in that.
Yes.
There is good business in the military-industrial complex, and that's I think sizing up the scope of what opposes unity and what opposes peace is important. It's important for us strategically to know what it is we are facing. So I think I find your views very realistic and a very good analysis of that.
My background was first literature, and then it was religion. But in recent years, I've tried to become more educated and involved in social justice work. And anyone who does community organizing, political work, social action work, learns that you have to be realistic about power,
right?
Because power keeps a system in equilibrium. The people who are benefiting from the system want to keep it in equilibrium because it makes their life easier. They make more money, they have more fun, they have less headaches, and all of that's understandable. But here's the interesting thing. I think on one level, we do need to face these realities of power. And of course, it's interesting for me as a Christian to notice how Jesus, for example, really some of his most shocking statements are about money because of the power of money. Christians seldom quote this, but Jesus said, if you want to love God, you're going to hate money. And if you want to love money, you're going to hate God. I mean, let that one settle in, right? But once you realize the power of money and the power of greed, then you start to see, oh yeah, that wasn't just hyperbole, that was reality, right? But here's the thing, the next step that I think we have to take. One of the reasons why power is such a tempting drug is because of the power of fear. And I think this is one of our other great challenges, because fear is like this hack on our brains. And demagogues and autocrats and authoritarians know how to play on fear, whether they're religious or political. And in a certain sense, if we're going to get through this mess that we're in now, it's going to involve, let me speak as a Christian, the Christian faith is going to have to stop using fear to manipulate people and start actually helping people live free of fear.
Yeah, yeah. So that's beautiful, Brian. And certainly, one of the things that is most challenging is the relationship between religion and politics, particularly in the United States.
Yes.
That's a whole other subject. But I want to ask you about Faith After Doubt, this book that you've got out. I actually have a personal story to share with you, which is I gave one of your books to a friend of ours. We were living up on the Thai-Burma border for a number of years, back around 2006 to 2012, working with migrants coming across from what was then called Burma, now called Myanmar. But there were quite a lot of evangelical Christians that were doing missionary work in that area, and we became friends up in this remote outpost where we were based. I gave one of your books to this friend of ours from Europe who was an evangelical Pentecostal Christian, right into the cult, her life was given to it, and she'd gone to Asia to do this work. And, reading your book, I can't remember which one it was. It might've been A New Kind of Christianity, but reading the book began to unravel her faith structures and her kind of belief systems. You pulled a thread, and obviously, it was kind of brittle and started to crumble, and then that led to a real completely stepping outside of Christianity and religion and faith altogether. And I'm sure you've come across this example many times where people are living a certain faith experience based on a theological structure, and then once it crumbles, the whole thing's gone. So Faith After Doubt strikes me as a fascinating field. I haven't had a chance to read your book, but I would love for you to share with us a little bit about what were some of the biggest insights in researching and writing Faith After Doubt.
Well, first, this experience, these numbers won't mean as much to some folks, but in the United States at this moment, there are between 65 and 70 million adults who grew up in Christian churches who no longer are part of them.
Right.
And every year that number increases by
it's a huge number. Yeah.
And so what's happening, and of course this has been happening for a long time, but it's happening in many other religious traditions too, that people have this feeling that their religion gives them this sort of comfort and a bubble of safety, but that begins to feel like a prison. And then in a sense, there's a point where you just want to be free of the prison and you want to break out of it. And but here's the problem: 5 minutes or 5 days or 5 years after you break out of that prison, you wake up with the same kind of existential questions that led to religion in the first place. And this is one of the great opportunities, I think, in all of our religious traditions, but speaking as a Christian, for us to say, once we break out, once we let that structure of supremacy, my religion's right, yours is wrong, you're going to hell, God loves us, not so much you, all of that dualistic thinking, once that begins to crumble, we can almost, in a sense, come back and look at our religion in a fresh light and say, I wonder if there's anything in the rubble of what's collapsed that could really help me as a human being and help us as human beings. And this is the opportunity that I think we have. In the book, I talk about 4 stages that it's a synthesis of an awful lot of theorists, but the stages that I use are simplicity, complexity, perplexity, and harmony. And perplexity is that stage of tearing things apart and in a sense being left with rubble and fragments. But harmony is the sense, okay, where do I go now? And that, I think, is the opportunity that more and more of us are going to have. I hold out hope that 50 or 100 or 200 years from now, children could be raised in forms of Christianity and other faiths that would not create this box of simplicity and complexity that they have to break out of, but would rather help them just grow naturally toward harmony. I have a feeling that's really the vision of all of the work for unity. We're trying to create a world where children grow up and considering themselves global citizens who love their neighbor and love themselves and love the earth and honor the sacredness, that's just natural for people. And that's, I think, what we're all working toward.
Oh, amen, Brian. That is a beautiful, beautiful vision, and definitely in harmony with others that are moving in that same direction, moving from a prescribed worldview, which is limited, to something which is open. And certainly, philosophers like Ken Wilber and many others in integral theory have been able to lay out some framework and some terrain maps for for this process, which can be helpful. Let's touch on the book that you're writing. Do I Stay Christian? I'd love to hear, what's the inspiration for this? It could be a very short book, of course, just with a one-word answer, but that wouldn't be much. What's your inspiration for this, and what are you exploring in this book?
Well, I think any serious Christian who begins to study history and begins, especially for a guy like me who lives in the US, who's watched what the Christian religion has done, major parts of the Christian religion have done in my country, both in our history of slavery and the slaughter of indigenous peoples, and more recently in some of our political misadventures. But you start to see the problems, and you start having real questions. Is this thing salvageable? And that question is so pervasive. Do I stay Christian? And people would be surprised to know how many religious leaders, pretty high up religious leaders, wake up many mornings and ask themselves that question. So I wanted to address the question in a thoughtful way. And so what I did is I divided the book into 3 parts. Part 1 is no, and I write 10 chapters on 10 reasons not to stay Christian.
Oh, wow.
And I think they're very, very good reasons. And in fact, I don't think anyone should stay Christian until they've faced those 10 and really coped with them. I think the religion is dangerous until we face those 10 problems. The second 10 chapters are called Yes. And that's where saying, in light of this, is there a way to stay Christian? Here's how I might do it. And then I get to the end of that and I say, listen, some people are going to stay Christian, some people aren't. I mean, the fact is, look, if I were a child who'd grown up in a Catholic church where I'd been molested by a priest, and then a bishop covered up for that priest, and all the rest that goes along with it, it may be for my mental health and my sanity, I need to get as far away from this religion as I possibly can, or at least from certain institutions, right? And so what I devoted the last third of the book to is the question of how, and shifting the question from do I stay Christian to what kind of human being do I want to be, whether I identify as a Christian or not. And this is, I think, maybe the step of maturity that we have to get ready to take, because a lot of people think if we could just get rid of religion, all of our problems would be solved. Right. And I understand why people think that, but if they think a little more, they'll realize that, that wouldn't solve all of our problems.
Yeah, it's so fascinating and so important, and such a personal experience for millions and millions and millions of people that you're right in the heart of. I have another friend who's also a fan of yours who recently has given up. He was also an evangelical that I met on the Thai-Burma border many years ago, but he's now given up his religion in a certain sense. And it struck me, Brian, that often people look at the etymology of religion, religio, to bind, and kind of, in a sense, there's a very positive aspect to that, which is to bind, to connect, to make connections, to feel connected. But it only struck me recently that there is also a really negative aspect to that, to bind and also into chain somebody up. And as you've laid out, we can see religion is fully present in both aspects of that. And I think that's the mature and the full view, is to be able to hold both of them together, as you've done in your book, in no, yes, and how, and integrating those aspects that, I'd often say that there's nothing further apart in all of human experience than bad religion and good religion.
It's so well said. Yeah, it's so well said.
So let's talk about this harmony, because we're here in World Unity Week, and we're so delighted, Brian, to have you with us. And we are talking and experiencing discussions and music and a whole bunch of range of different things that are really pulling us towards this more harmonious world that you're visioning, and that Teilhard de Chardin and so many visionaries, Buckminster Fuller and Barbara Marx Hubbard, and they're Rumi, St. Francis, there's galaxies of pioneers in this work. And let's look at this world that you foresee, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now, and where we are in harmony, and we are experiencing that respect of a multicultural cooperation, global understanding, and human brotherhood and sisterhood, and our relationship to other species, and the whole life creation of this glorious planet. What I wanted to ask you, Brian, is what is the unique contribution that Christianity brings to this? And I'm asking you this in this context. We've got, there is so much hope because we see movements in Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism and the environmental movement, the social justice movement, and this expansion of awareness that you're part of driving forward in Christianity is happening in every field, in every space, even in the scientific world, with David Sloan Wilson and others that are pushing forward against the selfishness of humanity towards our altruistic nature. And as this is happening in sort of simultaneously and erupting and all at once, what's the unique contribution that Christianity really brings to this emerging harmonious world?
Yes. So let me say, slightly reword that to say, here is a unique contribution that Christianity could bring. And in many places, I just think we have to be honest. It will not bring this. In fact, it will bring the opposite. But if we go back to Jesus's central teaching, it was this teaching that I grew up in church and I heard this a million times and I never thought about it, what it meant until I was in my early 20s. His message was the kingdom of God. And now when people today hear the word kingdom, of course, it usually doesn't go down well because first it feels patriarchal because of kings, it feels male dominated. And the whole idea of kingdom as opposed to democracy feels outdated and all the rest. But let's put him in his setting, in his situation with a dominating empire that behaved a lot like and even worse than the empire of the nation that I belong to. And so the Roman Empire is this vast reality. And Jesus, in a sense, his real term could have been rendered the empire of God. And what he does is he says, we've got the empire of Rome. Let's challenge it with another whole way of organizing our lives. And in this way of organizing our lives, a bunch of interesting things happen. Rather than domination, as you said earlier, service and love are what really count. Rather than obligation and debt, we're about forgiving debts so that we can meet one another as peers, as sisters, brothers, siblings, equals, friends. Friendship is really this bond. And something else that is really, really significant. A friend of mine said it this way: when Jesus proclaimed the kingdom of God, he said there's something bigger than God, meaning there's a reality in which God and creation are united in this larger reality. And this to me is one of our great challenges moving forward, because for us, what we've done in a sense is many of us in the Christian religion and in other religions, we've created this dichotomy. On the one side, you have God, spirit, soul, love and meaning. And on the other side, you have bodies and matter and physicality and so on. And what the kingdom of God is doing is saying all of that is part of one integrated reality. If Christians could rediscover that, that would unlock another great treasure, which is almost 2,000 years of a minority voice in Christianity that carried on spiritual practices to help people not just have that unity as a concept, but for it to become a lived and felt reality. Those would be some amazing contributions. I don't even know if we need to call them unique. There's a unique way that they can be expressed by Christians, just as there's a unique way they can be expressed by Hindus and Buddhists and others. But if Christians could rediscover this treasure, it would help Christians and it would help the world.
No, that is so beautiful. Thank you, Brian. And it strikes me also that there are some gems in Christianity which are accentuated, perhaps more so in Christianity than in some other traditions. The concept of grace,
yes,
for example, and that the ability to forgive the unforgivable is something that in Christianity is. I think there's a lot of resources in Christianity for this. The parable of the prodigal son, and the idea that it doesn't have to be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but that we can find that grace that can forgive the unforgivable. This is a gift, and there are others we can explore. And wouldn't it be wonderful for the conversation to be, what can Christianity, what can we do to serve the whole, rather than how do we take the whole for ourselves, but what can we do to
Exactly.
serve the whole that could unlock? And we have great heroes, and the man that's brought us together, Patrick Carolyn, of course, who was executive director of the Franciscan Action Network, and going back to Saint Francis again and taking another look at those examples and holding them up, not just for Christians, Brian, but for the human family.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a quick story about that?
Please.
I want to protect people's privacy, so I have to sort of do on the fly disguising of details. But I have a friend in a major city in a major country who has started a network of schools, and these schools work with the poorest children and some of the most roughest neighborhoods and underserved communities, and they're doing amazing things. And so, and this school has a Christian orientation, but very few of the people that they serve are Christians. It's coming out of this generous Christian impulse that we're talking about. And one of the officials of this organization was asked, since you're doing so much in our community, we have an interfaith council for the whole city. Would you be on our interfaith council? So she joins the Interfaith Council, and every meeting is an argument. This city doesn't allow people of my religion to worship on our special holy day. And then, you Christians get Sunday, but we don't get our days off. And so there's a big argument about this. And then next week, somebody else is coming back. Our religion doesn't get treated fairly this way. And every meeting was a grievance. And she raised her hand in one of the meetings and said, I wonder if sometime we could change our agenda. We've got to deal with these problems, but I wonder if each of us could come and say, here are the plans of my religious community to help our city be a better place for everyone. And a couple meetings later, they made her the chairman of the Interfaith Council. But what happened is it changed the tone of their meeting to do exactly what you said. Instead of how are we competing? How can we fight? And again, there's important work to be done to protect, especially religious minorities. But when each religion was able to come to a table and say, we have treasures.
Yes.
We would like to bring our treasures, and we need you to bring your treasures. This to me changes. And this is where, when that happens, and where I say to you, I have treasures in my Christian tradition that I want to share. I'm happy to share with anybody. I don't want to push them on anybody, but they're yours for the taking if you're interested. And you have treasures. Please, I'm interested in your treasures. It changes the way we relate.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's so beautiful. Well, there's a lot of hope in that, Brian. There's a lot of hope that we can make small adjustments that can have big repercussions in this. And you're doing that through your work, and very, very grateful. Just before we leave today, one final question for you, which actually Patrick submitted, which he wanted to ask about the youth. How do we engage, either as Christianity or just as a spiritual tradition, passing it on from one generation to another generation, and understanding that the youth are leaving the church in huge numbers? What can be the message and the outreach to the young people today?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that what happens in Christian settings a lot is older congregations say, we want young people. And what they don't understand is, to young people, it sounds like they're saying, we want you as fuel to keep our organization running. We want you to keep our thing going.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be fuel. But I think if we go through this kind of change that we're talking about, and if Christians could understand their calling as Christians is to be a blessing to everybody. And if these older Christians were to say, we want to find younger people who are open to that vision, and we want to get behind them. We don't want to trick them into being fuel for our organization. We want to bring our resources, our expertise, our encouragement, and permission and support to get behind them in exploring that vision. Here's what really becomes interesting to me. Jesus was 30 when he started his work, and 33 when he was finished. In all likelihood, most of his disciples would have been a good bit younger than him. So you could say Christianity was a youth movement when it first started. St. Francis was a young man when he began his work. He was soon joined by St. Clare, who was even a few years younger. You go through history. Protestants will know the name John Calvin. John Calvin was 19 years old when he began writing the Institutes of the Christian Religion. And I jokingly say to some of my Reformed friends, you haven't listened to a 19-year-old since. So, but if we were to realize where vitality happens, it's where young people are enfranchised. And, you know, I'm an example of this because I'm an old guy now, but the ideas I'm writing and talking about now, I had when I was 19, 20, 22 years old. And it's taken a lifetime to season them and get, you know, a chance to articulate them. But it makes me think, where are the 17-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 14-year-olds that we can get behind? I mean, we certainly see that today with Greta Thunberg and the amazing work she's done on climate, to remind ourselves that, that this isn't, well, in Catholic social teaching, they often speak of a preferential option for the poor, which I think is a beautiful phrase. And I think we also need a preferential option for the young.
Yeah, beautifully expressed, Brian. Great examples there through history. And I guess one follow-up question, which feels really important, particularly for a lot of our audience who may not be associated with an institutional or even a community of faith necessarily. But for young people, it strikes me more increasingly, they don't really want any part of the institution. They don't necessarily want that identity. And yet the potential for faith and for a relationship to God and the exploration of what that means in a personal sense is very alive for young people. Is it possible to have faith without religion?
I think it's pretty much impossible to not have faith in some way. You know, we human beings are oriented around stories. Our brains are wired for stories. And one dimension of faith is to say it's being able to act as if our story has meaning. It's saying, I can't prove that it has meaning, but I'm betting my life on it having meaning. If it were meaningless, who knows what I would do? I'm moving forward with the assumption that my life has meaning. So I think faith is a really deeply rooted dimension of human life. The question is what we're putting our faith in. You know, there are more people than we'd like to think who wake up thinking, you know, my faith is in capitalism, or my faith is in money, or my faith is in my nation and nationalism. And we're asking people to take a step bigger than that and have a faith in what Martin Luther King Jr. called the arc of the universe that bends toward justice, or to the daring proposal that the universe is actually striving towards something, and that something has to do with diversity and beauty and love and relationality and so on. Yeah, that to me is a kind of faith that many people had to leave religion to discover, because religion was only giving them an obsession with beliefs. And I think faith is so much deeper and bigger than just a list of beliefs.
Now, Brian McLaren, it's been so inspirational to have you with us. You really are on the cutting edge and the leading edge of pushing Christianity forward, and we're very grateful for your work. May God bless you indeed, Brian, as you continue to think and to investigate and to explore. And it takes a lot of courage to be in that place where between what is and what is not yet. And we're so grateful to have you with us on World Unity Week. Thank you, Brian McLaren.
Thank you. Thank you for your good work too, my friend.